John Maxwell once remarked that leadership is influence and influence is leadership. So how do we get the influence that we need, the influence that we want? How do we get this in a proper context and a proper role to build our organizations, to build our families, become the men and women we feel that we were destined to become? It all starts with a search for wisdom. Maxwell says that the search for wisdom doesn't come from speaking, it comes from listening, and that the lifetime reward of listening is wisdom itself. That our leadership ability comes merely from our ability to listen, to consider, to ponder, and to act. So what are these three core leadership skills that we must build? The three primary things we have to do first whenever we embark on our leadership journey. The first thing we have to understand is we have to understand how to communicate. How to effectuate our thoughts into the known world is paramount to us accomplishing actions, accomplishing our goals, accomplishing our dreams in an organization, in a family, in any relationship. And so what does this look like? This looks like people practicing, thinking, pausing, reflecting, using vocal variety in a way that it stimulates the excitement in the audience, yet ponders the thoughts and the whispers. So if we're to become effective communicators, we must practice this communication. This is 1A of one of these three skill sets. We have to practice communication over and over again. And one of the best ways to practice this is to teach communication. You all have teams, you all have children or nieces or nephews or neighbors who would love to learn to communicate, that you're a much superior communicator than they are. Teach them how to communicate. Walk them through the very basic principles. Through teaching, the teacher learns. And so whenever we look to become better communicators, we practice and we also teach. But we must have something to communicate. And the thing that we communicate must be something that we believe, that we know about. In order to know about it, you must have learned about it. And the primary way that most of us learn are through books. We have to understand what to read, what to bring into our mind to consider throughout the rest of it and take the tangible nuggets of gold and use those. The only way that we can use those is to consider them, flesh them out, and then to communicate them. Because the virality of a great idea, the virality of a great leader means he has truth to share with a wider audience and is able to communicate those. And so this first skill that we're going to build, this first core leadership skill that we're going to build is communication. And we've got some other videos on communication. I encourage you to look those up. But in the meantime, I want to talk to you about number 2, the second core leadership skill, this idea of organization. If I told you that I really don't have any skills, that I really don't have anything to really offer other than I am really organized. I'm very, very disciplined. I know where my information is. I don't ever forget anything because I've written everything down. I have an organizational system. You think, well, Rick, that's not very much. But I tell you what, organization is enough to build a business around. Organization is enough to build a organization and a business and a family and a life around if you don't have any other skill sets. And so we must build our level of organization. I encourage you to seek out a framework for processing information. I, for many of years, have used David Allen's Getting Things Done, the GTD system. You can find plenty of information about it online. I encourage you to read the book by David Allen, Getting Things Done. It revolutionized my life and my framework and how I conceptualize how to deal with information, how to deal with inputs, and how to get rid of things that don't really matter. You must be able to capture data, capture ideas for later retrieval, because whenever we don't think about data, we have our minds freed. But whenever we're trying to remember, hey, I've got to get eggs at the store after work, I've got to set the trash out because it's Wednesday, I've got to take my kids to this and that, and we don't have those written down, it burns up a little bit of the RAM. It burns up a little bit of your mental processing capacity, and every little thing that takes up 0.5% or 1% of your mental capacity eats away at your ability to be able to think about more important things. And so we have a framework, we have a system for capturing data, remembering things, and organizing the data. So this is the principle of organization. We capture this data. And then we have to have a framework for thinking about it, for processing it, right? If you have data, if you read great books, you have notes you've taken on that, how do you act on that? We have to think about this information and conceptualize. And so I found that not only taking notes on the books, but actually doing a debrief and drawing diagrams of how the information is correlated and interrelated to the internal structures of the book, but also to the external structures, the external frameworks of society itself, and really even the architecture of the literature from which it's based. Those are very, very useful activities in our organization. And finally, this idea of bringing new things into the process. Always adapt, always relate, always try to correlate what's working in secondary and tertiary markets, tertiary fields, tertiary areas, and bring this to organization, to your workflow. This might look like something like you see something really cool about how to pack a suitcase with these little packing cubes where you put your socks in one thing, you put your shirts in another thing, and you put them all in your suitcase, and it helps your suitcase run more organized. Well, what if you saw that and you synthesized that information and thought, well, what if I use the same sort of strategy for blocking my calendar? And this is how some of the more advanced theories of time blocking came about, as you saw this work in other areas and other domains, and they applied it to time management. You can do the same thing for not only communication, but also for organization. How do you synthesize information, synthesize ideas from outside your framework and incorporate those into your daily lives? This is a core leadership skill that we have to bring to fruition. And the third thing, and if you stick around to the end, I'm also going to give you what is the most important and why we're trying to build these three skill sets as leaders. The third thing that we have to realize is that we have to be able to lead meetings, because only by leading people in really the primary area where you have their attention, meetings is how you're going to be able to advance forward and advance the objectives of your organization forward. It's also the side communication. It's also the water cooler talk. It's also the emails. But leading meetings are where you have the most impact, because people are not distracted. What you're trying to get at is, how do we capture people's attention, and how would you use that attention to the best and highest advantage? And the best way to do this is to have effective meetings. And so how do we run effective meetings? I've done a whole video on the 1,000+ meetings I've led and over 150 board and committee meetings I've led that I'll link to below. The idea of a meeting is, first of all, to set the agenda and only focus on things that are actionable, right? They're briefing meetings. 95% of briefing meetings could be done via email, could be done via reports. So we want to focus our meetings and focus our time and our efforts on building agendas that are focused on action. Remember, agenda and action both start with A, and that was what needs to come first. A always comes first, agenda and action. And so whenever we work our way through this agenda meetings, we're always looking for action items. Now, this is the second part. This is the second component, that which may even be more important than the idea of agenda when running meetings, is we're looking for actionable items. Now, at the end of the meeting, this is something that Peter Drucker speaks about in his book, The Effective Executive. Something that some of the great leaders of the automotive industry did is they're sitting through meetings and they're looking for actions. And whenever they find something that's an actionable item, they write down that item, but they also put a name, the person responsible, they put a date by which that is due, and they also put who's accountable and who's to be reported on this. If you think about the old classical RACI matrix, RACI, you think about who's responsible, who's accountable, who can be consulted, who should be informed of decisions and actions. This is similar to that, just a reduced level of this, that unless we have actions that are listed, we have someone responsible to do it by a specific date, you can never hold anyone accountable. If you can't hold anyone accountable, then no one's accountable and nothing's going to get done in the long term. You might have the sporadic success, but unless someone is accountable and there's a due date, it's hard to move the organization forward. And so we've talked about these three things, that the first three things you want to build as a leadership in your skill set, in your toolbox, is the ability to communicate, the ability to be able to be organized and disciplined in your actions with your time and with your information, and finally, to be able to lead effective meetings. And so what is the benefit of having these three things in place? I would submit for your consideration that the only deduction, the only outcome, the only signal of success for a leader is the ability to be able to influence. And if we can't influence, we can't drive the organization forward. It's incumbent on you and I, my friend, to build these core sets of communication, of running effective meetings, and running a organized operation first. And then from that, those give us the seeds, the very inspiration to weave and to sow into our organizations, into our families, of influence.